in the extremes, because that's all people remember. And the learnings from, obviously one of the greatest books ever written, Thinking Fast and Slow by, the sadly recently departed Daniel Kahneman and his partners, talks about the memory of experience is more important than the experience itself. So he had a student, he's a professor, he had a student. He said, "What do you do at the weekend?" He said, "Oh, I listened to a concerto on an LP record. And at the end, there was a scratch on the vinyl, and the needle jumped, made a terrible noise, and it ruined the experience." And he said, "Well, it didn't ruin the experience because for 20 minutes you were having a great time, right? But it
Right.
ruined the memory of the experience, right? And that's how CX kind of works, is the memory experience. If the last time in my experience with my bank, I was on the call center hold for 3 hours, right? That's probably a bad memory the next time. But if they solved my problem, maybe my credit card got stolen and I had to ring them up to cancel it. If they solved it without any problem, the memory of that experience, I've forgotten the 3 hour wait time. It's like, yeah, they solved my problem kind of pretty well. So what we try to talk to with our design teams is how can we create memorable experiences that build positive memories in people's heads? So next time they think, oh, I need a Pepsi or a Coke, which one do they naturally go for? The one with the stronger positive memory of that. That's how we try to think about memorable design as opposed to just utilitarian design.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of CX with Chopra. Like every time, we talk about everything CX. And as we understand, a customer, goes through multiple interactions or has multiple interactions with the brand, with the product, with the service, with the employees, during, before purchase, during purchase, post purchase. And an interesting point of view is that CX is nothing but an art of perception. That how do brands manage these perceptions? Because then this perception then translates into brand trust, which then translates into sales. So it's very important for brands to consider now that when we talk about CX, we also talk about emotions. We talk about having positive and memorable consumer experiences. And to talk a lot more about that, to talk about what are the trends, to talk about how Gen AI is going to come and change the game, to talk about how should we ideally measure CX, to also talk about that, do we understand humans? Are humans predictable or not? So welcome, Simon. Thanks for joining. So I'll just
Thank
quickly
you,
introduce to
Arjun.
Simon. Yeah, Simon is an international lead for data and AI at Publicis Sapient. He's from how I see, he's been constantly bringing new innovations, from curiosity to reality in the last 2 decades. From what I have seen and experienced, he's a true thought leader. You can go yourself and Google it, go to YouTube videos. He's been talking about CX transformation 7 years ago, 8 years ago. He already spoke about generative AI and its applications much before ChatGPT hit the world. So it's all there. You can go and check. I've personally been inspired by him, his thoughts, his ability to see through patterns and bring out clarity of thought. So super excited about this. Thank you, Simon, for joining.
Well, thank you, Arjun, and thanks for such a generous introduction.
Uh, I know there's lots to talk about, but one of your old videos or point of views which I was very much inspired by was that humans are predictable, and you spoke about a lot of trends, things in that, which I believe when we're talking about CX transformation is very critical to understand that, because yes, digital transformation has happened. Digital transformation, to a certain extent, in my view, is more of how technology is evolving, how new experiences would evolve. But major part of CX is consumer, so it's very important to understand that the consumers, the human psychology, what are their patterns, and very interesting things. That you talked about, that how, something that you do, you're more likely to do again and again. I just want to first start our discussion with that point, because it's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, well, maybe, for me, digital is data. It's just ones and zeros, floating about the ether. We're just so able to be able to capture that now and organize it and analyze it and see those things. Like humans have been buying from humans for a long time, but there was no data, not before loyalty programs, really. But as soon as the internet came a commercial thing 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago now, I guess, we could start to see every link in the chain. That's not to say that all digital data is useful, but we could start to fill in the blanks and start to see the patterns that emerge there. And yeah, humans are extremely predictable in a number of ways. Um, and that can be exploited by people as well, which is the kind of maybe the watch out there is that, we all know after a while of consuming people's data, what promotions people are sensitive to or what kind of incentives might motivate them to do something. And, most of the time that's broadly in the, pursuit of capitalism and making money, and generally things are pretty good. But, I think the danger today is there's more and more data on consumers online, and, that can be exploited by bad faith actors or, people encouraging you to do wrong things. And I guess the challenge today is that the gap between what we should do with data and what we can do is a chasm. It's never been wider. And, it takes kind of responsible people to be, in charge of that data, because we all see from the stories of, Facebook and things that happened way back that, not everyone is a good faith actor. And, some people are trying to exploit us all for their own gain.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if you look at the pattern as well, like you spoke about that in that video, that if, I mean, this was true earlier. I just want to discuss if it's true now. Like, the more you do something, the more likely you're going to do it again. I mean, be it drugs, be it extramarital affair, or
Yeah.
even translates to website visits or orders.
Yeah. Well,
But
in my defense, I have to use references to extramarital affairs and drugs to make the topic of data a bit more interesting to a broader audience. But yeah, everywhere you see, let's take it back to commercial realities that
yeah,
the more you buy from a brand, the more often you will buy it again. And that's all that really is the power law, the kind of the S curve of adoption, where lots of people have made one transaction, a high
hmm
proportion of them have made two, a greater proportion of the two have made three, and so it goes on. So that's just like a stacking of like the power laws that we see everywhere, the Pareto effect, if you like. Every brand has a strong Pareto where, maybe not 80%, but let's say 70% of sales come from 20% of the customers. The trick is to figuring out, which customers are driving that and where you can still get growth from as well. Because just because you're valuable doesn't mean to say there's a tremendous amount of growth left in that. But yeah, humans are predictable because we're creatures of habit. We all, regardless of whether we say we are or not, that we all have our preferences. And that's what's played out in the data. And I think that's what's so important to CX is the data is the consumer, right? And the data doesn't really lie. So, like, if you're not looking at that data and you don't take first-party data seriously, you've got a void where the consumer should be, and you're relying on instincts, your own personal opinions. You're not looking at what the data's saying. And therefore, like, anyone who doesn't think first-party data strategy is important to them is crazy, right? Because you're giving up free information. Now, you may not sell directly to consumers, but that's where you're getting all your intel or your insights that drives new marketing activities. Think about new deployments for your apps or your websites. This is where like that kind of insight should come from. Now, the caveat to that obviously is that the curse of data is, all data is historical. And
right.
if you drive by looking through the rear view mirror, sooner or later you end up in a ditch. So you can't
Yeah.
just rely on the data. You need to use your common sense and your perspective of what the future is going to look like. But yeah, that data is a tremendous friend and ally to anyone trying to do their job.
But again, to your point, one of the points in your video, I mean, one common pitfall of looking, first of all, yes, first party data, I mean, there are no doubts in that, especially when we're looking into a cookie-less future, less reliance on third party data. And if any brand already has first party data, it's like gold. I mean, if you're not making the most of it. But then the common pitfall is also to start using it and segmenting users. And then, I mean, like you also spoke about, segmenting users may not be the right thing, because it could be the same user who could go do binge drinking, and the same user probably Monday to Friday would be eating healthy food as well.
Yeah.
But now with data, can we go ahead and do some, I mean, I don't know if it's still a thing, like a hyper personalization? I mean,
Yeah. I
look
mean,
at
it's an even,
moments
it's,
rather than people.
yeah, I would say for like at least 20 years, personalization has been held out as the holy grail and the big trend that's
Yeah.
going to change everything. And yet, hasn't happened every year for the last 20 years. Some of that is because of the cost of variance. It just costs more to generate more content for different people. So you've got to some companies don't have the means to have content factory to generate all of that kind of content. In other cases, like we don't know enough. We don't truly know enough about users' lives, what's important to their lives. We only know the relationship with us. So sometimes it's a big leap to kind of figure someone out based on just our relationship, and not that what's happening in their life. Um, But particularly with AI, everyone thinks that generative AI is going to enable new levels of hyper personalization. But personalization is really a machine learning. It's a recommender engine. It's like predictive models. Gen AI only gives you a natural language front end into some of these things. And if you type into
Hmm.
ChatGPT, like give me some segments, it's making it up. It's not statistically building rigorous segments, right, from base data. It's just using its training data to come up with something plausible, which is fine if you want personas or you just want some kickstarters to get going about thinking about customers. It can be great for that, but it's not like actually doing the work that you really need to do for like a behavioral segmentation, for example.
Yeah, understood. And also, I mean, the point you said that we love habits. If somebody has done something once, twice, or thrice, there's a high likelihood that they're going to do it again. But if you look at in today's scenario, especially in the context of retail, I mean, there's so many options out there, and even further, if focus on Gen Zs or Gen Alphas now. I mean, for them, switching brands is like a swipe.
Yep.
Swiping a reel. It's as fast as that, and even one bad experience could turn your loyal customers away. I mean, that's what some of the industry researchers have said as well. So how much can brand I mean, especially like age old brands which have been out there for like decades, for which may not be uh, digital native organizations. So for them, how okay is it to rely on their reputation or what they have been doing for so many years, and just you know focus on that as is going to help them win more customers? Or
Yeah, you can't take anything for granted. I think a lot of the earlier years or decades even of experience design, like focus a lot on utility, and usability, and making experiences work for people, removing the friction, like cleaning stuff up. But I think what's happened over time is the like a lot of apps or a lot of experiences all look the same. If you put your thumb over the logo, you wouldn't know what company it was coming from because like everyone's like converged on this Apple pattern of lots of white space, full bleed
yeah.
images, clean fonts and stuff. And so that has now become like, well, that's like best in class. So everyone has to do that. But I think more recently, and this is where it's more interesting probably, like people have figured out the like we don't want to occupy the same space. The in following the task of trying to clean things up and make everything usable and clean for everyone, we've lost the brand input. And ultimately, when everyone gets their digital experiences to 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10, then there's just like a sea of sameness where everything's all the same. And so
Hmm.
to differentiate yourself or become distinctive again, you need to make sure you're, playing to the strengths of your brand and ensure your brand is in everything. So, an example of that might be luxury fashion. Like, heaven forbid, Arjun, you go onto the Gucci website to buy a pair of like leather trousers and $2,000 leather trousers. Like, do you want to buy them in 2 clicks in 3 seconds and just go in and check out, or do you want to see what stitching is like, or maybe some AR how it looks on you, how it goes with your Nike Air Force Ones,
Yeah.
so for a fashion brand, they shouldn't be trying to copy Amazon, which is kind of like one-click checkout. There's still some kind of hearts, minds, wallet selling to be done where people, yeah, might desire the product, but you still need to convince them that spending, $2,000 on a pair of leather pants is a good decision for you. So you might want to slow down the experience, and immerse the person in the provenance of the materials, in the where, the process of the stitching and the detailing, all those things. So what's right for Amazon isn't necessarily right for Prada or Gucci, in terms of what the experience they're trying to build. And I think what we've seen more recently is more of again, moving away from there's one pattern to rule them all to people are trying to like be true to their brand. And I think that's exactly the right thing to do is your digital experience should be an extension and reflection of your brand as a company, not something different or disassociated from your brand. It should reflect all those types of things. And in many ways, it should be the best version of you. If you're a luxury goods seller, there's a bunch of companies out there trying to sell your goods, maybe in the grey market or maybe, in through third parties. But your version of digital should be the best version because you've got best sales copy, the best imagery, the best version of presenting your products. So you can coach up all your retailers and anyone who's reselling on Amazon or anything to, follow your best practices.
Yeah, interesting. But then is it, so one side is, yes, what you're saying makes sense, that you should stay true to your brand values, brand fundamentals, and play to your strengths. But on the other side, consumer expectations have also risen, drastically, especially if I say post pandemic, when digitization probably happened over steroids.
Yeah,
And now, I mean, even if I look at my phone, I use my food ordering app, my banking app, my Uber app, and probably Instagram, all in 1 hour. I mean, now,
yeah,
I mean, from my perspective, gone are those days where I would have certain leniency. Let's say if it's not, I mean, if it's utility, yes, I would have a certain expectation of CX. If it's food, I'll have certain expectation, or if it's banking, I'll have separate expectation. But now, from a consumer perspective,
yeah.
my expectation is everything should be seamless, everybody should be cutting edge and giving me all the same experiences.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I mean, how do we draw that line then?
yeah,
Because
I
it
think
becomes,
those are table stakes. Like consumers,
right.
if your experience is in any way difficult or clumsy, you must have a really good product or service for me to put up with that rubbish in order to buy.
Yeah.
So, like, not many of us have amazing products or services that stand out from the pack these days. So, you must have a usable experience that's convenient. Convenience drives adoption always, right? We're again
Mm.
creatures of habit, and we want to find the shortest path to our goals ultimately. So that'll always be the case. Then the brand stuff is how you then stand out from that sea of sameness on top of that. But yeah, the table stakes are never going to go away. Just like, you can't go to work without wearing deodorant and putting your trousers on, right? It's like you need to do those things. They don't make you
Hygiene.
successful, but you're
Yeah.
not going to be successful if you don't wear deodorant or wear trousers to work. So it's kind of you have to do those things. But to get to 8, 9, 10 out of 10, that's where the brand kicks back in, I think.
Interesting. And when we look at, I mean, we've been looking at the whole digital transformation for last 2 decades, but lately we are seeing, everybody's talking about CX transformation in the last 4 to 5 years. So what, according to you, is the biggest challenge in CX transformation?
Well, I think, like one of my colleagues loves the iceberg metaphor where, 90% of the effort goes below the waterline of the iceberg and
Hmm.
you don't get to see it. And I think that's the challenge. It's not necessarily the design, but it's the back end data, the back end systems. I think in the last decade of digital transformation, for many people, that's really been the journey to cloud and it's moving data centers. To begin with, kind of lifting and shifting of those things, and now kind of reinventing on the cloud and modernizing architecture. In digital transformation, we've gone through digitization, which is just taking
Hmm.
analog things and making them digital, to true like digital transformation, which is not copying and cloning what went before, but making it better and reimagining. And I think that's where the challenge in a lot of digital transformation programs is that not enough effort has been given into CX redesign. It's still about cloud because that's where the cost is, and that's where the business case is justified from. Sometimes the CX part is just an afterthought or it's not central to this. So yeah, I think that sometimes it's about priorities in the business case, and it's all about the things you don't see under the waterline around
Right.
digital transformation, not necessarily the thing that's most visible to consumers.
And is it also because there's no clarity around where does CX sit inside the organization? Is it the CMO who's looking into it? Because typically, historically, CX has been looked after by the CMO, where we're looking at awareness, reaching out to people. But now, if you look at the chief technical officer, also plays a key role because it's the tech which is enabling most of the
Yeah,
innovations in CX.
yeah.
Or
At Sapient, we have a CMTOU, so Chief Marketing Technology Officer, that
yeah,
represents that Venn diagram coming together. And my colleague Sheldon invented that a long time ago, well ahead of the
yeah,
market trends. Um, yeah, I think that the reality is the experience is part of the brand, should be controlled by marketing. That's and we're seeing more and more CMOs having responsibility for the experience. A lot of banks, the marketing team generate traffic to the website. The digital team manage the non-logged in state, and the
hmm,
IT team manage the authenticated logged in state. That's a terrible state of affairs because you've got two different handovers or handoffs, and you've got three different teams pulling in three different directions. You've got to have this.
right.
If you want the seamless thing you were talking about earlier, You need one central point of failure or one central point of control that manages the end-to-end experience. Because as a consumer, like I see your ad, I click on your ad, or I'm in my app, or I go to your website, or I'm checking out my checking account in a logged in state. I see you as one bank. I don't see you as three different teams doing different. Oh, I understand why this
Yeah.
doesn't connect. If I start a loan application on my app, I expect to call a call center and continue that same loan application. You should know how far I've got, where I got stuck, and how you can help
Right.
me to do that. But even that sometimes today is really difficult for businesses because they still have a product and a channel mentality rather than a customer mentality. And it's only through putting the customer at the center can you kind of start to see the matrix of, oh, it's our own internal organizational structure is getting in the way of giving customers value. We always talk about customer value, but that means like the value to us. But what's valuable to a customer? That's probably a more difficult, but more rewarding question to answer. Just like, oh, next best action. Is another. Oh, we got a next best action model, and and it's again, well, what's the best action for me as a brand versus
Hmm.
what's the next best action for the consumer? And again, like if we can reorientate our questions and our thinking around what's valuable to a customer is going to give us more of their business. If we just keep chasing the money, like what's the incentive for the customer to give us more business? So I think by bringing this all together, you give yourself a much better chance to understand what's important in the customer's life and then figure out how can we bring that value to them rather than saying, oh, Arjun, you're a good customer, therefore I want to get more money out of you. That feels the wrong way around to me.
But what's the practicality of it? Should organizations have like a customer experience officer, or sh- because otherwise CMO, CTO, or COO would all maximize locally, but nobody will
Yeah.
maximize, for the global impact.
Yeah, really good point. Maybe if I can cheat your question slightly by saying, like, who owns the customer in a company? And when you start asking that question, it doesn't make sense for a CTO or a CIO to own the customer. That's like not a smart answer to that question because marketing already owning the customer, but maybe they don't own the full estate. And that's like if you
Hmm.
want to be customer centric, much overused term, then I think you've got to bring together that ownership of customer under marketing. Marketing is the one part of the company that's responsible for growth of customer value, right? So that's why it needs to be attached to the customer. That's not to say that customer services, customer care, those things aren't important, but the orientation I think needs to be more around marketing because no one else cares so much about the customer as kind of marketing does because it's a outwardly facing capability. A lot of technical services are more inward facing. They tend to be cost centers. So, and what happens with cost centers? Well, everyone wants to cut costs and optimize it. Marketing teams about growth. It's about, well, we need growth. So we're not going to just manage the costs on marketing. We're going to spend where it's appropriate to do so that we think it's going to drive growth. So I think that's a straightforward decision. And the challenge is, I guess, for a CMO is most chief marketing officers come from a advertising or media background. 90% of the money, historically, 90% of the money that a CMO spent was on media spend. So people who are comfortable doing that are far more likely to be CMOs. But
Hmm.
now, like, I can't remember what the latest Gartner figures are, but I think it's roughly, CMOs spend equally on technology and on media. And therefore it takes a different class maybe of CMO to thrive in that kind of environment where they're spending so much money on technology. They've got to understand the technology and understand the value of it. They've got to have the soft skills. So, in our history of working together, you know, where did we have our biggest success? Where clients had made huge investments in Adobe or Salesforce, but they didn't have the skills internally, and then they look for a consultant like us to help to give them the short term capability, but as they build their
Right.
own capability. But it's tough. It's a tough process. The biggest kind of bottleneck in companies being good with martech today is people with the soft skills to use the tools, right? That's still a challenge because the tools themselves are always progressing, always getting more complex, always new
Right.
releases, always condensed into a cloud. Now you have to have 20 different tools coming together. So that's a huge challenge for brands is like, how do I develop the soft skills? Not in my headquarters office, but all around the world, because all around the world we're doing this kind of stuff. And for a global brand, that's a huge challenge.
Yeah, no, makes sense. But then, I mean, like, typically they say that don't talk about, you know, your product services when you market, probably talk about what problem you can solve for the customers. And likewise, with the whole digitization, now brands are also talking about, let's say, they have a new app or they have a new platform or they are on metaverse or they're doing a particular, gamification. And then they're also telling about, how it can help. But then, because now everybody is bogged on or hooked on to the whole innovation, everybody is looking for that next big thing. Would the CMO still look after that? Because CMO would have a certain influence of circle of influence, then how far that
Yeah,
can go, because you have to own the customer end to end.
yeah,
And in most cases, most businesses, I mean, which have higher customer lifetime value, acquisition, yes, is very important, but then it's also how you engage. I mean, especially if you look at travel and hospitality, it's when the user, the whole experience of staying, let's say, in a hotel for for holidays, and then what happens beyond that, that whole experience, would then the CMO still have that influence on, how do we call the shots in terms
yeah.
of.
It depends on the company. It depends on the industry. Like in consumer goods companies, CMO is a very senior position, very powerful. If you look at Unilever,
Right.
P&G, Nestle, they're marketing run businesses. Marketing is very important. If you look at a bank, marketing is a much smaller expense area, and maybe the CIO is far more influential in the bank because they're taking care of core banking systems and making sure payments go through and important stuff like that. So I think it depends on your orientation of what industry you're in. And obviously there are bits where the product itself, whether your product is a hard product or a soft product, airlines, hotels, as you say, that gets even more complicated. But to me, that's the future is that the CMO owns the end-to-end experience, which means that marketing needs to evolve. It can't just be about comms, media. It needs to be about experience. And I think what we've seen over the last 20 years is CX has grown from being this kind of techie digital thing to now being like almost an equal partner in marketing alongside, advertising, media, and now CX is like third wheel, if you like, a third leg of the stool. And the challenge
Hmm.
is in advertising, there's 40 years of history of how advertising works. There's lots of great books, Byron Sharp's How Brands Grow, the IPA Effectiveness Awards. There's lots of
Yeah.
really good material that you can read and learn and educate yourself around the science of marketing, pretty much. It's kind of been solved, the science of marketing, how it works. Um, None of that is true for CX, right? CX, there is no book, not a book that explains how you kind of succeed as you do with marketing. There is no equivalent of the IPA effectiveness awards that give people like, peer reviewed papers you can read about how things are done. So CX is much more immature. And there's no real like thought leaders out there who really, know the space intimately in the same way as some of the advertising giants, kind of do. So
Yeah.
like there's a lot of chances, but there's probably less kind of people have the true knowledge. So it's just immature. You can't. It's the textbooks aren't there. I guess the
Yeah.
university degree courses aren't quite there yet. You can do a marketing degree. Can you do a six? I'm sure you can do a six degree now, but it's just more immature, and that will change over time. And I think boundaries are being blurred. I was in a big pitch yesterday, big global pitch, and the change that client is going through is one from the brand agent advertising agency takes the brief first and then they brief all the other agencies to now know,
Yeah.
right, there's an influencer over there and they've got a really good idea and we're going with their idea. So, the old hierarchies in all forms of marketing are being challenged. And it's not necessarily your, Madison Avenue ad agency that leads the charge anymore. It could come from, creativity can come from anywhere because the growth of social media platforms, the interest in Web3 projects. A term I heard yesterday for the first time in a large client meeting: drop culture. How do we
Mhm.
get into drop culture? That's now a thing you have to think about. So marketing is always evolving, and I would say that CX is one of the junior branches of the tree, and it's like growing up to be a much more central component of marketing going forward.
I agree with you. And one of my, guests in the previous episode, Vivek Puri, he talked about that one way to unify all different business units in an organization is to have one common CX KPI. and have everybody aligned to that. I mean, for example, for Uber, it could be, let's say, the average wait time. Now, if everybody focuses on optimizing that, there's a higher chance that, overall as an organization, they're going to get aligned and focus on delivering that impactful CX.
Yeah, I love the clarity and the simplicity of that. But there's also a thing called Goodhart's law, which is, whenever a metric becomes a goal, it ceases to be an accurate metric. So, you know,
Yeah.
kind of because people will game it, right? Just like NPS. Like I'm sure at some point or other, NPS was pretty accurate, or maybe still accurate, but quite predictive. But as soon as people's bonuses are tied to NPS, they figure out ways to game the system, right? You'll start making
Right.
changes that improve that metric, but don't necessarily improve what you really want, which is the growth and profitability of your business. So any metric that isn't tied to the growth and profitability of your business, can take you down a path where you optimize against it, but nothing changes. So
Right.
we've had the UK government in the past with the NHS. We have NHS as our natural health service. Have waiting times. So they figured out if they don't check people in fast at A&E, the waiting times will go down. Or the time it takes you to get onto a hospital bed. So what they were doing was throwing people onto beds in the corridors. Because so the metric went down. Did the
Right.
outcomes for patients and their health improve? No, of course they didn't. And that's the challenge with you and I being such data nerds, is that we can always gamify the system to make a metric hit. So I think that's
Yeah.
I agree with Vivek's point, but that's the danger of that. Is it's great for bringing people together, but if you're not honest, you then
Hmm.
starting doing things to improve NPS or improve average wait time, and they don't really anymore have a material impact on the performance of your business.
That leads to my next question in the next segment, that then how do we measure CX? Because, like you said, historically we've been looking at NPS and CSAT, but that to me is more like a postmortem report. I mean, it's like what happened 3 months ago. You're looking at the numbers
Yeah.
now. There's not much you can do. And we are in the age of real time personalization. Customers expect that if I've had a bad experience while I'm staying at the hotel, I want them to rectify the experience then and there, act on it. So, what should be the right way to look at, how do we measure CX?
Yeah, so we've wrestled with this topic for a long period of time. I don't think there are great CX metrics out there, not like one system to rule all the systems. There's obviously
Yeah, of course.
various aspects, NPS, CSAT, things like that. But I think what you really need to do is to tie customer experience to growth. That's the only way to do it. And the challenge is unlike advertising, we could spend a load of money and put an ad on YouTube. There's a half life of response to that ad where you get a lot of responses
Right.
immediately, and some people absorb the ad and do something later on. But you can measure that's a period of time. When you change experience, we all experience the experience, if you like, at different times. The next time I log in, the next time I buy. So you can't
Hmm.
time box the same thing and neatly extract out that half life in the same way as you would with an ad campaign. So the econometrics don't work in the same way. So advertising uses media mix modeling, econometrics. You can't really do the same thing for experience because we all experience it at different times. Even though it might be launched on
Hmm.
Jan 1, that's really difficult. So what we've generally looked at is through research is asking people two questions like, did I get what I wanted out of the experience? And was it good, better, or worse than equivalent experiences elsewhere? Right? And the thing about experiences is most people don't remember experiences because there's that normal distribution bell curve, right? Where if you're in the middle 90%, let's say, no one remembers an average experience. It's only if it was really
Hmm.
good or really bad that I remember it. And what you're trying to do is obviously reduce the bad and increase the really, really good. Now, some things like paying your bills online, it's very hard to have a really good experience of paying your bill down. But booking a holiday, if you're
Yeah.
excited about it, it might be easy to have a really good experience of that. But yeah, the challenge is identifying what drives bad experience and eradicating it. It's not about increasing the experience for everyone 2%. It's more say I only really care because it only really matters in the extremes because that's all people remember. And the learnings from obviously one of the greatest books ever written, Thinking Fast and Slow by the sadly recently departed Daniel Kahneman and his partners, talks about the memory of experience is more important than the experience itself. So he had a student, he's a professor, he had a student. He said, what do you do at the weekend? He said, oh, I listen to a concerto on an LP record. And at the end, there was a scratch on the vinyl, and the needle jumped, made a terrible noise, and it ruined the experience. And he said, well, it didn't ruin the experience because for 20 minutes you were having a great time, right? But it
Right.
ruined the memory of the experience, right? And that's how CX kind of works, is the memory experience. If the last time in my experience with my bank, I was on the call center hold for 3 hours, right? That's probably a bad memory the next time. But if they solved my problem, maybe my credit card got stolen and I had to ring them up to cancel it. If they solved it without any problem, the memory of that experience, I've forgotten the 3 hour wait time. It's like, yeah, they solved my problem kind of pretty well. So what we try to talk to with our design teams is how can we create memorable experiences that build positive memories in people's heads? So next time they think, oh, I need a Pepsi or a Coke, which one do they naturally go for? The one with the stronger positive memory of that. That's how we try to think about memorable design as opposed to just utilitarian design, all those things, because that's how, to us, experience works. It's building positive memories or not building negative memories. You know, sometimes people say building a brand is like building a nest. Like everything you do adds a few more sticks or leaves or
Right.
whatever to the nest. It's the same with experience. Every interaction is just building the next nest. Now you can destroy the nest obviously with one bad interaction, but it's not like one good interaction and you now have a fully formed nest. If I'm going to continue this tortured analogy, but it's about every interaction building to build that nest up. So we think it's like the memory of an experience. You know, why do people in hotels turn the corners of the toilet paper over? Like, what does that achieve? Like, what utility does that give
Right.
me? Why do they leave a chocolate on the pillow? Right? It's just to remind you that you're in a hotel and that's special compared to being at home. Because at home you don't have a chocolate on the pillow. I
Right.
guess most of the time, and no one turns over the corners of the toilet paper. So those are
Right.
hallmarks of good service, right? And that's what they're kind of brainwashing you into thinking is, oh yeah, I'm in this special place where someone turns over my duvet at the beginning of the night, they leave a chocolate on my pillow, and someone's always folding up the corners of the toilet paper. You know,
Mm.
there's no benefit to any of like what's like. Imagine we're in the finance team. We're like, well, what's this costing us, and what are we getting
Yeah.
back? Like, no one would be able to calculate the ROI on those things, but it is
Right.
contributing to building memories and memories of experiences that pays you off in the future.
And that's what makes it, I think, very interesting and challenging at the same time for brands to decode, how to deliver on great experience. It's like, it's probably those little things, how true they are to themselves and how much they understand their customers, and what will translate into a good positive memory. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I
great
think
point. And
part of it, a bit like how hotels have figured it out, is figuring out what are hallmarks of great service, and then
hmm,
how can you deliver those things. I think that is the things that brands can think about is, how can we show this? How can we create hallmarks of good service, and then also like another learning is how stories end is super important. How we evaluate stories. So how experiences end, just like the you solved my credit card problem, will dictate whether I
right,
have a good or bad memory of the experience. So thinking about how you exit people from your experiences is fundamentally disproportionately important. And not a lot of people think that because I check out right by, but like, how do you want to end? We always think about the landing page, right? And the first
right,
point of interaction. What are we thinking about the last page? Often it's like, hey, and while you're here, can you fill in this 30-page survey? It's like,
yeah,
no. Or, hey, why don't you get notifications from my website? It's like, I've never agreed to notifications from any website ever. I mean, that seems like a crazy pattern to me. So a lot of
right,
people miss out on this opportunity for real estate at the end to reinforce a positive message that intentionally builds the positive memory that you reinforce like a nest. So that when in 2 months' time, in 5 years' time, when I think about, oh, what dishwasher brand should I get? I haven't thought about it for 7 years since I bought the last one. And there might be something
right.
about how the experience went last time that triggers me to say, I want this brand. That's how it works.
Yeah, and that I think keep making our analyst life tougher and tougher.
Yeah.
The more questions we get about how do we measure CX, but yeah, I mean,
Well,
it's good.
you know what it's like.
Yeah,
The more, how it works is the more cool insights we come up with, the more questions that drives to which we don't have the
yeah,
answer. Then to figure out how to capture the data or
yeah,
how to kind of calculate the metrics. So, but that's progress. To me, that's progress. Like the more complicated questions we can answer, the better job, we're doing.
But yeah, in the end, it has to all tie back to growth, like to your initial point, that as
Yeah,
long
for
as we can
me, like
justify
you can
that.
tie it
Yeah,
back to marketing is pretty much the only part of the business responsible for growth. It's ultimately all about growth. Yeah, we can say that, ROI has two factors to it, return over investment. So yeah, there's lots of
hmm,
things we can do to cut costs to minimize investment. But ROI to me is a bad metric because it's a metric of efficiency. It's not a metric of
correct.
growth, and I can always increase ROI by having my costs, right? So, like, if you want the ROI to
Hmm,
go up, great. The real thing is we want as much growth as we can get at an acceptable ROI rate. So, an ROI should be like a minimum threshold. So, as long as I'm getting 1.5 to 1 or 2 to 1, right, and I'm getting loads of growth, that's what I want. I don't want a little bit of growth at 10 to 1 ROI. That's crazy talk, You want to
right.
minimize your ROI, sorry, above a certain hurdle rate.
Oh, yeah, great point. And just now coming into my last section, I mean, we can't really have a discussion in 2024 without talking about generative AI in detail, I think. And to that, I mean, I just want to first bring out that, this the rate at which the innovation is happening is crazy. I mean, if you look at 2023, probably was all about metaverse. 2024 was probably all about generative AI. Or 2022 was metaverse, 23, and now, was Gen AI. And now 24 is going to unfold new things. So the rate at which technology is innovating is very fast. Now
Yep.
for organizations to adapt to it, they're going to have a certain curve which may not be as steep as how the tech or innovation is happening. For example, companies had just started to build out, figure out how to go and tap into the whole metaverse market, but now nobody's talking about metaverse. People are now talking about generative AI, and now companies are now looking into reinvesting or looking at how they should jump on it. By the time probably they do that, something new might come up. And another dimension is the consumers. Now consumers would also have a curve in terms of how much they get used to a certain tool or technology. I mean, metaverse, let alone metaverse, probably some of the innovators were still trying it, and now it's nobody's talking about it. Now we have, let's say, things like Apple Vision Pro. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very difficult for brands to now match
Yeah.
up with the consumer curve as well as the tech curve, and where to draw that fine balance.
Yeah, I think some talking head from AI a couple of weeks ago said, if AI development ended tomorrow where it is today, it would take 10 years for enterprises to adopt all the new breakthroughs in technology that AI
Yeah,
generated. But the reality is it's not stopping, right? It's only accelerating. We're at the embryonic stages of AI development today. These are like the baby steps, right? We're kind of
right.
tottering around. But the next generation is going to be so much smarter and so much better. And for people who don't believe that AI is going to be a big thing, the question I was asking is, in 5 years' time, do you think there's going to be more AI in the world or less? And I think it's a pretty safe bet to say there's going to be more, right? It's going to be more important
Right.
than it is today. I think one of the other crazy things about generative AI is with the launch of ChatGPT, immediately 100 million people have got access to the technology and they're using it for very practical applications. So whilst there's loads of
Right.
benefits to Web3 and loads of interesting things going on, like the practical applications are far less than AI. My kids can do their homework. My parents can book their family trip.
Yeah.
Everyone can use AI for a number of different reasons. So immediately, it's not a technology looking for a problem. It's already highly practical. And unlike a lot of other technology breakthroughs, it's in the hands of consumers already. So to your Uber point earlier, you know, um, customers are already demanding, like, why hasn't my bank got AI? Why hasn't my grocery store got AI? I've got it. Like, I can use it. Why can't you guys bring it to me?
Yeah.
Normally, with technology innovation, it comes from big brands first, and then ultimately it filters down into consumers' hands. But this is the other way around. It was democratized, into hundreds of millions of people's hands, and now the demand is there. I think to your other point, yeah, I agree. Like 2023, I call it the quiet before the storm. So because ChatGPT launched on November 30th, 2022, it was too late for companies to budget for investments in
Hmm.
AI. They probably didn't have an AI budget, right, at
Yeah.
that point because they did their budgeting in September, maybe. So unless you had a true cost outplay, it was probably hard to get your use cases funded internally with AI. There's lots of experimentation, very little production last year, but we're already starting to see that change. We've got a bunch of use cases live with big clients, Marriott Bonvoy hotels. It's all live working. It's driving up our CX metrics. it's improving performance. It's
Yeah.
kind of road tested already. And this is just like the very first steps of that. And like, as someone who's been in data their whole career, this has probably been the most fascinating period of my career since like the mid 90s when I started. And that's all through to like the democratization of AI. Like we've been talking about machine learning and AI for years, and it felt like
Right.
it's just too complicated for people to get their heads around. Like now it's like, oh, I've played with ChatGPT, I know what you're talking about. All of a sudden, it's a boardroom issue. So the great news for you and I is, we've now got more opportunity to go and speak to the board as opposed to the
Right.
boiler room around, what we need to fix to get better results.
Cool. Thank you so much, Simon. It was very insightful, and like you always do, bring clarity in a very something which is very unstructured and uh, overwhelming. So thank you so much for that. And yes, I mean, looking forward to more such conversation in future.
Thank you for inviting me, Arjun, and it's great to catch up.
Likewise. Thank you. Thanks.